Alrighty, welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, August 28th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start with a couple of predictions for this upcoming week. It is officially week one. We're about 24 hours, a little bit more from these games officially kicking off, and we're going to have 5 straight days of college football. So it's about to really get into kick into high gear, and cannot wait for it. But we're going to start with the Georgia-Clemson game. That's the one that I feel like I have the best beat on, so I started with that one today. Then we'll get into the Thursday night football games. We'll get into Colorado-North Dakota State. We'll get into Minnesota-UNC. And then we'll take a little bit of a break from the predictions until tomorrow, where we'll get into a ton of predictions. But we're going to get into UConn possibly joining the Big 12. That is a big-time news story that came out the last couple of days, and definitely has a couple more hurdles to jump, but a very, very interesting product that we will definitely talk about in the third segment. Then we'll close the book on week 0. We'll give you updates on what did we learn about SMU, Florida State, and Georgia Tech. What did we learn about these teams, and what are some people overreacting just a little bit about these teams. Then we'll get into my bold predictions for the 2024 season. A couple that I think are pretty bold, and I'm sure you guys will have a problem with a couple of them. I can almost promise you that. But definitely a really, really fun show today. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, be a little interactive, is to use that little $ at the bottom of the chat. It's a super chat. You can click that button, write any comment, question, criticism, anything you want in there, and it will pop up on the screen with your name. I will absolutely get to you at some point. Sometimes the chat goes a little bit too quick for me to keep track of, so sometimes it's a little bit easier to get your question known. If you'd rather use the GSMCpodcast.net page, that is still up there for you to use if you would like to, but super chat tends to be just a little bit easier, so utilize that if you'd like to. But let's go ahead and jump in, because we got a ton to get to today, and we're going to start with Georgia versus Clemson, the game that's happened about 15 minutes about east of me right about now. So it's going to be incredible to watch this game unfold in Atlanta on Saturday, and there's a ton going into this game. You know, Clemson coming off a couple of years that were not what they wanted them to be, and they want to kind of bounce back and be on the right track. Well, this would be a great way to do it in week 1, no doubt about it. And then Georgia walking in, being the big dogs, being the dominant force in college football. It seems like they're going to stay that way for quite some time, but maybe this week is a little bit of a stumbling block in that race for them. But let's go ahead and jump into this, and let's get into all of the different details around this one. This one is at Saturday at noon. UGA is favored by 13.5 points right now. Over-under set at 48.5. And I think when you're looking at this from 50,000 feet takes, when you're looking at just the whole thing, Clemson is still a huge question mark on offense. No two ways about that. Georgia has seemed to be a well-oiled machine the last 3 years, and is going into a building that left a very sour taste in their mouth the last time they were there, when they lost to Alabama in the SEC title game. So I think you're looking at this game, it's very possible to fall into the trap of Georgia's just going to come out hunting and Clemson's going to be a little bit shell-shocked. And I kind of utilize that. I kind of buy into that. But at the end of the day, I don't know if I'm as gung-ho on Georgia just outright blowing them out as everyone else is. But let's get into the big-time storylines as we get into this, and then we'll get into the specific teams. But one of the big ones, UGA's running back situation is not great right now. It sounds more and more like Trevor Etienne is going to be suspended. In fact, Pete Thamel yesterday put out a kind of prediction of sorts that he was going to be suspended for this first game. It looks like Roderick Robinson is going to be out. He had to deal with a turf toe injury that had to get him surgery, so that's something that they're going to have to monitor over the next little bit. And then you have Branson Robinson, who's still working his way back from a patellar injury, so not a lot of options in that running back room for Georgia. That has obviously been the staple of that offense for a very, very long time, and likely will be again this year. It's going to be kind of an interesting start at that position, that's for sure. Clemson's wide receivers is the other thing that you're watching very, very closely. Bryce Wesco and TJ Moore have shown themselves to be the most talented wide receivers in that room throughout fall camp. They are definitely the best guys in that room right now, and they're going into a game where we're going to find out a lot about them pretty quickly. quickly. Around 1 p.m. on Saturday, we're going to be talking about them in one way or the other, whether it's they're putting way too much on these young kids' shoulders or, man, these kids walked onto the field and just immediately started making plays. Now, they do have to go up against guys like Dalen Everett, who I think is going to be a superstar at the end of the year, if I'm being honest. I think Julian Humphrey's a really athletic player. I think Daniel Harris has made big-time strides this offseason. So I really like the back end for Georgia, but maybe these freshman wide receivers can make something happen, and TJ Moore and Bryant Wesco can change the complexion of this game just a little bit. And then it's a rematch from 2021. This was kind of the game that set off the UGA dominance over college football. They have not lost a regular season game since that day, or well, they didn't lose it that day, but they have not lost one since then and have done an incredible job. Now, will we get a little bit of a repeat, a little bit of a defensive battle again this time, because it was 10-3 last time and Christopher Smith was the only one that scored a touchdown, and that's a safety for Georgia. So it was definitely a very benign game at times, definitely a rock fight, if you will, but I think we might just get a couple more points this time around. But let's get into the weeds a little bit here and talk about how Clemson can win this game. What do they need to do to find their way into an upset in Atlanta? And the biggest thing for me is you got to establish the run early. This is an absolute must. There's no two ways about that. And Phil Maffa is a darn good running back to be able to establish the run with. When you have almost 1,000 yards rushing a year ago, 5.4 yards per carry, when you outrush Will Shipley in that room, it's going to be very impressive. And now Will Shipley's gone. You have to assume more of the load is going that direction, especially because the depth in that room is not necessarily incredible. Keith Adams Jr. is a guy to watch there, but overall, it's not necessarily the incredible unit that you would think, but Phil Maffa is definitely plenty capable. And then you look at the UGA defense, and if there's going to be a place to attack them, at least the way that it seems, it's going to be that interior defensive line. So we'll see what can happen there. I think that's something that, if this doesn't happen through the first quarter, if we're going through the first quarter and Phil Maffa has about 10 yards rushing and can't get anything going on the ground, it could be a really long day for Clemson. And then get Cade Klubnik into a rhythm. I think that's something that goes right with the run game. If you get the run game going early, it's much easier for Cade Klubnik to get into this game and get rolling. And I think it's a lot of really short passes, a lot of passes where he knows where the ball is going, where he can put the ball there, like screens, drags, all of the stuff within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, just to get him going. And then you can just go to anything he's comfortable with. If he's really comfortable throwing dig routes over the middle of the field, go to that. If he loves throwing seam routes to Jake Burningstool, do that. If he loves throwing out routes to a couple of the elite wide receivers on the outside, that's the way they should go. So it's all about getting him into a rhythm early on and then letting this kid's talent take over, because I know there are some questions about him last year, but it doesn't change. This is a very talented kid, and if you can get him going in a game, there's not a lot of defenses in the country that could be able to stop him at his very best. Now, we haven't necessarily seen that too often in his college career, but maybe Saturday is when he flips that official switch. And then the last thing for me is it's got to be the Peter Woods and PJ Parker show. Throughout this game, the UGA O-line is going to be incredible, and we know the run game might be a little bit more suspect with those running backs being out. This is the place where you're able to set the tone. With Peter Woods in the interior and TJ Parker coming off the edge, they're both very special players. You know, TJ Parker having 5.5 sacks as a freshman is outright ridiculous, and I think he's going to be even better this upcoming year, but he's going to go up against Xavier Truss. He's going to go up against Ernest Green III, and he's going to have to be ready to go. There's no two ways about that. So it's going to be really interesting to watch those two especially go to work, because I think them being able to possibly blow up the run or heat up Carson Beck in the pass rush game is going to make things so much easier for this back end that has just about a million things to keep track of for that UGA offense. And now let's move on to what UGA needs to do to win and how they can pull it off this Saturday. And trust your O-line and running backs, mainly your O-line in this case, because you obviously have some running back injuries. There's no doubt about that. But you look at the guys that are going to be available. Branson Robinson is going to be available. I think he's still recovering and likely won't be even near 100% if I had to imagine. You do have Cash Jones, that's a good veteran. The guy that I'm watching is Nate Frazier. I think this might be a coming out party for that freshman. I think he is remarkably talented. So many people have been tying him to Todd Gurley, and if you remember in 2014, Todd Gurley did some mean things to Clemson, so maybe Nate Frazier can pick up where he left off in do some mean things once again this Saturday. But I do think Cash Jones is another really good option here. He understands this offense. He knows exactly what he's going to do. And frankly, behind this offensive line, I think there's a world where I could get 3 or 4 yards. So I think you trust this offensive line to get the push on the interior with Tate Ratledge, with Dylan Fairchild, with Jared Curtis, and just say, we're going to run the ball. That's who we are, and I can't imagine it's going to be anything different for the Georgia coaching staff, frankly. And then spread the ball around. And frankly, this is going to be the case for pretty much every UGA game you watch this year because they got so many weapons out there. They did lose Ra Thomas because of some of the off-the-field issues with him, but they still have Dominic Lovett. They still have London Humphreys coming over. They still have a myriad of tight ends. They still have so many running backs that can make play. Dylan Bell, who's one of the most gadget players you'll ever find in football. So many remarkable guys, and frankly, an elite facilitator in Carson Beck. So the way I look at this Clemson defense is the strength is through the middle, where it's Peter Woods, followed by Barrett Carter, followed by R.J. Mickens, right through the middle of that field. If you can spread this team out a little bit, if you can make it tough for them to really bear in on the run and really focus on one guy or one scheme, you're going to be able to have a lot of success, no doubt about that. So I think spreading the ball out, getting these defense a little bit more spread than they're comfortable with is likely the way that UGA is going to go about business. And then finally, keep Cade Klubnik confused. That was a mouthful, but keep him confused on Saturday because this is going to be a kid that you've shown that there are holes, there are issues in his armor, no doubt about it. And I think the biggest thing here is if you get him off on the wrong foot, if you get after the quarterback, we talked about this a little bit throughout building up to Georgia's season. The pass rush has to be a ton better. In 2021, when they first played, Georgia had 49 sacks throughout that season. Last year, they only had 30. I think it's going to be a little bit closer to that 21, but it definitely has to be in this game. And then on the back end, it's all about Malachi Starks. He is the guy that makes everything so difficult for everyone around the country. And frankly, I think he's going to make a number of plays in this game. And that back end in general, it was a worry going into the offseason. I'm not so worried about it anymore. I think Daniel Harris is a guy to watch that maybe isn't all the way where you want him to be, but at the end of the day, very talented kid. And I have very, very little problems with this back end as of right now. But moving on to my official pick, I am going to give you a score for some reason. I know that's kind of a fool's errand, but I figured I'd take my shot at it. And I am going to go Georgia wins this one 27-13. I do think that line at 13.5 is right where it should be. I think it could be a 7-point game going into the fourth quarter or in the fourth quarter, and then Georgia does enough, and Nate Frazier maybe just has a big-time play towards the end of this game to win the game for Georgia. So I'm leaning Georgia. I think it's going to be a battle, so I am going to take the under 48.5. I feel pretty good about that. I think it's going to be a rock fight, especially early on, and I think this Clemson offense is not necessarily walking into a position where they can work out kinks. I think it's going to be pretty ugly week 1, and then we'll figure out what this Clemson offense really is starting week 2. But obviously an incredible game in Atlanta, only about 10 minutes from where I am right now, so maybe I'll try to make my way down there and see if I can, sneak in the back and find this game. But overall, it's going to be an incredible game, no two ways about that, and I think it's one of those that is going to kick off the college football season, at least for week 1 on Saturday, just in an incredible way. So I do have Georgia winning that one by about 14. I think the line is just about right, but let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a Thursday night football games. We're going to do Colorado and North Dakota State. We're going to do Minnesota, UNC, and both of those are going to be very interesting games. So we'll break them down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the Georgia-Clemson game. I do think that one is right on the line for where it's supposed to be. I think Georgia wins that one 27-13, but it's going to be an interesting game. Could go a number of different directions, and if Clemson comes out a winner, we're having a very interesting conversation on Monday. I can promise you that. But let's get into the Thursday night football games because we have a couple of really good ones. North Carolina is playing Minnesota. Colorado is playing North Dakota State. We also have Arkansas. We have Utah. We have NC State playing tomorrow. So plenty of football for you guys to watch, no doubt about that. And we'll kick off the week one in really, really good fashion. But let's start with these games, and I'm going to start with North Carolina against Minnesota. North Carolina is favored by about 2 points in this game, over-under at 51.5. It is at Thursday at 8 p.m., going to be a really, really fun game. It's one of those that maybe doesn't jump off the page the same way in LSU, USC, and all of these other incredible games of the year, but at the end of the day, two Power 4 opponents going at it in Minnesota. I gotta love it. And I love that these two schools actually scheduled this game because there's a world where both of them are playing FCS or pretty easy FBS opponents and just rolling on with their day. So very much like this matchup. I think it's going to be a ton of fun. And a couple of stats to keep in mind as we get into the picks for all of this and breaking down this game. Minnesota has won 9 of the last 10 games as an underdog against non-AP ranked opponents, so doing pretty well against teams that are not in that top 25. North Carolina has failed to cover the spread in 6 of their last 7 games. That was kind of the moniker down the stretch of the season where North Carolina was just not playing the football that they needed to play. And then Minnesota has covered the spread in 4 of the last 5 games against non-conference opponents at home, which is a huge, huge thing in this game and something we'll break down here in a second. But getting back into this, I think I'll start with the quarterback situations because that is all over the place, frankly. You look at UNC, Max Johnson, I tend to believe, is going to be the guy that trots out there first. He will not be the only UNC quarterback that trots out there on Saturday. Connor Harrell will absolutely get some reps at some point in this game, and as we saw on Saturday with SMU, it's not necessarily the best way to go about business. So we'll figure out what happens beyond this game, but as of right now, it looks like both those guys are going to get run, and it'll be a ton of fun to watch. On the other side, you have a very interesting quarterback situation, although they know who their guy is. Max Brosmer was a transfer from New Hampshire, and this guy was up for the Walter Payton Award in the FCS, and that is kind of the Heisman of the FCS, if you're not aware. So a very, very talented kid, someone that absolutely was the top cream of the crop in the FCS, made his way up to the big leagues in the Power 4, and we'll see how he kind of handles his first game, but getting it at home is absolutely huge, I can promise you that. But moving on to the running game, because that's likely where this game is going to be decided more than anything else. Omarion Hampton, I could talk about for days. He's one of the best running backs in the entire country, over 1,500 yards a year ago, 15 touchdowns, 5.9 yards per carry. The guy went to work. It was absolutely incredible to watch him, and we'll get into why it might be a little bit of a step back this upcoming season, but just a remarkable player and definitely will be the catalyst of that UNC offense by a mile, if I'm being totally honest. And then on the other side, Darius Taylor, his status for this game is a little bit up in the air. Not super sure how healthy he is because last year he only played 6 games, but in those 6 games he almost had 800 yards rushing, 5 touchdowns, 5.8 yards per carry. So the kid's very talented, no two ways about that. If he's on the field, he's going to make some plays. So a ton going into this game, and I think the run games are really going to be where you see a lot of this game decided, but the case for Minnesota is pretty simple, honestly. First of all, the quarterback advantage goes Minnesota's way. I feel pretty confident in that, but also playing at home is huge. This Minnesota crowd, I understand it's not, in top 10 lists or anything crazy, but they're going to be active. I can promise you that. PJ Fleck has done a great job of getting that fan base around this team even more than they already were, and I think they're going to be absolutely incredible. On the UNC side, I think the biggest thing here is you know exactly how you want to defend them. There's not a question about how you want to go at UNC, where it's just Omari and Hampton, absolutely stop number 28 and then let them beat you passing. If Max Johnson and Connor Harrell are going to be able to put together performances to beat you passing the ball, then I think you tip your cap and you move on. But at the end of the day, UNC returns one starter on that offensive line. Maybe they don't have the run game that we think they're going to have this upcoming year. And Jaw Joyner, a very talented defensive tackle for Minnesota who had 7.5 sacks last year, is kind of licking his chops down there. I can almost promise you that. So it's going to be an interesting game, but Minnesota, it's pretty straightforward. You got a home field advantage. You have the advantage at quarterback, and your defense knows pretty much exactly the way they want to go about business on Saturday. Or on Thursday. Moving on to UNC, this one is very, very clear. The Golden Gophers are not good at stopping the run. They're gave up 149.1 yards per game on the ground last season, and multiple teams put up 200. And frankly, Omari and Hampton is a guy that could put up 200 by himself. So maybe it's one of those games that UNC doesn't need the quarterback issues. They don't need them to do anything other than turn the ball around, hand it off to 28, and then just watch him go. Because this kid is downright talented, and also overall, UNC just has the benefit of talent in this game. Whether you're talking about Camion Rucker on the defensive side of the ball, Omari and Hampton, Max Johnson, all of these guys are plenty talented and definitely have just the slight talent advantage over that Minnesota team. And obviously, they're going to go about business a little bit differently in Minneapolis compared to Chapel Hill. So it's kind of a really, really fun game. And I think when we get into what I really think is going to happen for this game, I like Minnesota. I've went into this game thinking one thing. I thought UNC was going to be able to run Omari and Hampton and be able to win this game kind of ugly, just kind of gut this one out. The further I looked into this game, the more I felt good about Minnesota. Whether it was UNC not having the offensive lineman they had from a year ago, Jaw Joyner being as dominant as he is, or Darius Taylor hopefully playing, being as good as he is, I think Minnesota is able to sneak this one out. And it being at home obviously helps this a little bit as well. So I think UNC starts the season off on the wrong foot. I think Minnesota gets this one done 23-20. It is going to hit the under. I feel pretty good about that. 51.5 seems pretty lofty for two teams that are going to do a lot of their work on the ground. So I think this one is going to be a nail-biter down to the wire, a little bit ugly at times, no doubt about it, but I do think Minnesota takes this one 23-20 and starts their season on probably a better foot than some people thought they were going to. But moving forward, we got to talk about Colorado and North Dakota State because everyone's circling this one, and it's a lot of people circling it because they want to see Deion fail. That's just the plain, simple truth. That's the case around a lot of college football right now, but there will be people hate watching this, no doubt about it. But Colorado is favored by 10 points going into this game. 60.5 is the over-under, so pretty lofty, as you can imagine, with the Colorado defense from a year ago, and this one's going to be at the exact same time, so you might want to break out that second TV and see if you can get this Colorado game on at the same time as that UNC one. But overall, some facts to keep in mind for this one. Colorado went 4-8 last season, obviously. NDSU 11-4. So they are a team that is coming off a really good season. Frankly, it might be a little bit of a step back for the NDSU program, but at the end of the day, still a very capable team, returns a lot of players, and that's kind of the big storyline of this game. But the underdog has covered the last five spreads in the last 6 games for Colorado, and then Colorado has failed to cover the spread against any non-FBS teams in its last 5 games. So definitely a huge couple of things to keep in mind. Now, the FCS one is going to be one that you're not necessarily going to want to put as much weight into because they haven't played an FCS team since Deion showed up a year ago. So that's one a little bit of a wash, but if you wanted to bet against Colorado and had an argument to make for it, then you might as well throw that one out there, I suppose. But getting into this, what the craziness of this game is going to be, and for me, it starts with the North Dakota State run game. I think that's the place that a lot of this game is going to be decided, and they get after you in so many different ways. A lot of the quarterback run game is going to be a huge part of this, and Cam Miller, the very talented quarterback, is coming back for this 4th season. Cole Payton, is someone to watch as well. Both of them had over 600 yards rushing a year ago. So these quarterbacks are going to get after you, and then you have some other guys on the outside. You have a very talented kid in Barika Pinu, a very talented running back. Shamar Brown, another one to watch that got injured last year but is a very talented young player. It sounds like Dion really likes that unit, but as of right now, NDSU is going to be able to run the ball, and they're going to run it a lot at them. So we'll find out how much they really like their defensive line on Saturday. And then on the other side of the ball, it's all about Dallin Hayden. You got to get that guy rolling. You got to get that run game rolling because it gets that offensive line a little bit more comfortable, and especially give Shedeur Sanders more time. And that's the end-all, be-all for this team throughout this entire season. So overall, I think you look at Colorado, and the talent level is firmly on their side. I think the transfer portal guys they brought in, LaJohntay Wester, Will Sheppard on the outside, are going to be absolute stars for this team throughout the year. So I think a ton of very, very talented players, and very much like this group for Colorado on the outside. For NDSU, they did lose some big-time players like Eli Green making his way over to Iowa State, but Raja Nelson is a guy to watch, a very talented player, and likely going to see a lot of Travis Hunter on Thursday night. So going to be an interesting battle to watch there, but my case for North Dakota State is pretty simple. All things considered, it's pretty simple. It's not simple to execute, but definitely simple to say. Keep that guy on the sideline. Shedeur Sanders is the best player in this game by a mile. He is a guy that absolutely can totally change the complexion of really any game, but especially a game where the talent level on the other side isn't necessarily up to the talent level that he has. He is going to be able to possibly take over this game if they let him. So the goal for NDSU is just run the ball, control the clock, make sure that that offense and that guy in particular is on the sideline for as long as possible. And then on the other side, it's all about that defensive line. It's a really, really good group. Dylan Hendricks, sacks leader from a year ago, very talented edge rusher. And then you have a couple of really talented interior guys in Will and Eli Mostert. I apologize, that's quite the last name, but at the end of the day, both those guys are very elite defensive tackles, and they have a ton of experience. So it sounds like Dion loves his defensive line. I don't know how much he loves his offensive line. He's been a little bit coy when talking about them, and it'll be interesting to see what these very, very talented defensive linemen can do against this unit. Moving on to Colorado, the case is very simple. The skill position players, there's a comfortable gap here. The wide receivers, the running backs, especially the quarterback, there is a comfortable gap between what Colorado players can do and what North Dakota State players can do. So that's the way you're going to beat them in a lot of ways, is just get the ball in the hands of LaJohntay Wester and Will Sheppard and all of those elite receivers, Travis Hunter, another one, and just let them go to work, plain and simple. And then the other thing I really like about this team is I do like this D-line. The interior D-line I'm still a little bit out on, but at the end of the day, I love BJ Green. I love Deon Hayes on the outside. I think both of those guys are going to be huge, huge players in. Were huge upgrades for this team when they got them, no doubt about that. So if they can slow down that NDSU running game, especially the quarterback running game, they're going to be plenty successful. But on to my picks for this game. I think Colorado, is able to win this one. I do think they cover that spread of 10, but at the end of the day, I don't think this one's going to be a blow-up by any means. I think North Dakota State's going to come out with a very clear game plan, and it's going to impede Colorado's ability to really pull away. Now, I do really think that Colorado is going to be able to control this game pretty much from start to finish, but I think North Dakota State is just pesky enough to hang around and make this one at least interesting going into the fourth quarter. But I do like the over 60.5, no doubt about it. I think this is one game that you're going to get a little bit of a track meet, even with NDSU running the ball as much as they're going to. I think they're going to be able to score plenty. So I think this is going to be a ton of fun, and I do like that over to hit. I just realized I was doing the Georgia caption there. Apologies. But at the end of the day, I think this is going to be a couple of really fun games tomorrow that we're all going to want to tune into. But that'll do it for the second segment here. Let's get into the third segment here in a second, and we'll talk about UConn possibly making their way into the Big 12. Definitely a really interesting debate that's going on around Big 12 circles, and one that I think might have a couple more hurdles to get over than a lot of people seem to think. But we'll get into that right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down the Thursday night games that you're going to be able to see tomorrow with UNC-Minnesota and Colorado against NDSU. I do have Minnesota and Colorado taking home those wins, but I think we're going to have some fun games on Thursday, no doubt about it. But let's get into UConn possibly joining the Big 12. This has been something that's kind of been bouncing around the Twitterverse the last couple of days, and something that is going to concern football a little bit down the road, but I do want to get into the idea of this and all of the different hurdles that could come up during these conversations, because as we all know, as we've all kind of learned throughout this realignment world that we live in today, it does not stop. There's no world where these guys can stop, frankly, at this very moment, because guys like the Big 12 just have to stay alive. They have to try to keep up with the pack, and Brett Yormark is doing an incredible job of just throwing stuff at the wall. He's doing everything he possibly can to add value, to add revenue to this program or to this conference, and it's going to be really interesting to watch, what the next move is after this. This is something that has been kicked around a little bit for the Big 12. They talked about possibly adding Gonzaga a little bit ago in the basketball realm. It sounds like UConn was that next choice, and frankly, it's a really good choice. There's no doubt about that, and it'll be really interesting to watch this unfold, but obviously, there are going to be some hurdles in this process. There's no doubt about that. UConn is one of those teams that, when you look at them in basketball and some of the other sports, you think of them as a great athletic department. Then you get to football, and things look a little bit different, and that's kind of one of the big things in this is they would join in basketball and all other sports in 2026. So not too long from now, they'd be able to join. They do have to give the Big East 27 months to kind of figure out where they're going to land after this. So do have to wait a little bit here. But at the end of the day, they would join in everything except for football in 2026. Football would hypothetically come in 2031 if they were able to meet certain financial benchmarks throughout that time. And those are relatively unknown right now, but essentially just put more money into that program, get them to a place where at least they're relatively on the same footing as the Big 12. And there have been some complications, as you can imagine. With any of this realignment stuff, there's always some things that get in the way, and it's not just the presidents or the fans, because I know that there are some people that are against it in that realm, but it is the power brokers of the sport in a lot of ways. So one of the bigger ones is, it sounds like Fox is not in on this. It sounds like Fox is not interested at all, and they just signed a deal with the Big East, so it's not surprising to see why they would not be in interest for this, because the reality is they signed a lot of that contract because of UConn basketball and because of what they did on the in the men's side and what they've done for years on the women's side. So I do think that's one of those things that you're losing a ton of money one way or the other. You're losing the asset that is the Big East in a lot of different ways, because UConn is a huge name out there, but also having to restructure a Big 12 contract, adding in UConn, would be an outright nightmare and would cost a ton of money in legal fees and all of that type of stuff. So Fox is not much in favor of this. ESPN very much is, and it's for the exact opposite reason, because they don't have a stake in the Big East, and they very much want one. So it's going to be one of those things that's going to be really interesting to watch, and we'll see which one of these two it wins out, and frankly, either one of them could, hypothetically, if enough money was, waved in front of their face, if I'm being totally honest. But at the end of the day, it will be interesting to see all of this unfold. And it sounds like the presidents and all of the people around these universities have been approached with this idea. It sounds like about 6 of them are in favor. At least CBS Sports has been able to verify. 6 are in favor of UConn joining, 2 are not in favor. And the 2 that are not in favor are honestly kind of right in this scenario, because the way that they're looking at it, at least from the stories that I've seen, is they're looking at it in terms of the playoff. They're looking at it in terms of, how does UConn football, how does that program itself, how do they help us get better in terms of getting into the playoff more often? They would likely lower your strength of schedule. Even if you hit all those financial benchmarks, they would likely lower the strength of schedule for all of the teams that they played across the conference. It would likely put the conference in a place where they might even take a little bit of a step down in the national perspective because of adding a team like that. And on top of all of this, there are bills that have to be paid here pretty soon. And that's kind of where the rubber meets the road for the rest of, let's say, 5 years or so around conference realignment, where there are a lot of bills coming up that they don't know how much they're going to be, they don't know how they're going to distribute it, and they don't really know how the system is going to work around it. So I think it's one of those things that a lot of presidents are sitting there and saying, it would be great to have UConn in this conference. You know, they would bring money, they would bring a little bit of revenue, especially on the basketball side, and would make you the best basketball program in the entire, basketball conference in the entire country by a country mile. But at the end of the day, I think they're worried that you bring them in, you're cutting the pie just a little bit thinner. And those big time bills that are going to come on for revenue sharing and all of that type of stuff might just become a little bit harder to deal with. And then on top of that, you're not necessarily bringing in a football program that elevates you. You're not bringing in SMU. You're not bringing in Florida State or Clemson. You're bringing in a program that you have to kick down the road because they're not there yet. So it's not necessarily one of those things that I think is on the horizon. I think it is something that we likely will see at some point, frankly, if I'm being totally honest with you, just because that's usually how realignment works. When something is wanted enough by a group of people that are powerful enough, it tends to happen. But at the end of the day, there are a couple of hurdles, I suppose, before they get to the N9 here. And obviously the Big Ten would love to add Danny Hurley and that incredible program that he's put together the last couple of years, but frankly, I don't know if Danny Hurley would be too in on that idea of leaving the Big East, because that dude is Big East through and through. But at the end of the day, I think you look at this and at face value, it sounds a little ridiculous, right? UConn football being able to be in a Power 4 conference sounds a little crazy. Maybe they meet those financial benchmarks and look like a totally different program at the end of this. But overall, I don't see a world where they add this team and it boost their odds for the playoff, where it really, really helps them get to that next level in the playoff conversation. So it's one of those battles that'll go back and forth. It sounds like private equity has not been involved in these discussions at all, and if they were to get involved, some things would get a little bit easier very quickly. I'll just promise you that. But at the end of the day, it's one of those that I think it would be cool at the very least, because I think the case study of a team saying, you know, they're starting in 2024 or 2025 and they have till 2031 to essentially build up a football program. Now, UConn still has some good things going for them. Jim Mora has done a great job over there, but at the end of the day, there are leaps and bounds behind the majority of the Big 12 teams. So it would be really interesting to watch this unfold if this deal goes through in the next little bit, and if UConn knows that they're going in as a football program in 2031. It would be fascinating year over year to watch this team just slowly get better or slowly not get better, because maybe the infrastructure is the problem, not the amount of money you're putting into the program. So it's going to be a ton of different things that kind of unfold over the next little bit. I tend to believe this has a couple more hurdles than some people think, and is going to be a little bit tougher to pull off overall, at least in the short term. I do think this is something that when you have someone like Brett Yormark kind of at the center of all of this, a lot of stuff is going to happen. He's a very, very intense, aggressive guy, and especially in the world of realignment, he's been at the face of it for quite some time, and I think he'll continue to be at the face of it for quite some time to come. So this is just another move in this massive chessboard that is conference realignment, and trying to figure out just how you elevate your conference's brand, you elevate your conference's revenue, while not taking away from what your conference is, and not taking away from the possibility of your conference participating in a CFP or something like that. So it's going to be a battle. There's no two ways about that. I think there's going to be enough presidents, there's going to be enough TV executives that just don't love this idea, at least in the short term, that maybe some things need to change to figure out how this is going to work. And overall, when you look at the basketball part of this, it's an absolute slam dunk for the Big 12. Now, the Big East will do everything they can to hold on to UConn, but at the end of the day, they would be the best basketball conference in the country, and it wouldn't even be remotely close. They would have Arizona, they would have UConn, they would have Kansas, they would have Baylor. It would be outright ridiculous what they'd be able to do in terms of basketball. But on the football side, it's not necessarily the incredible powerhouse that you're hoping to add to the Big 12. I can promise you that. Maybe by 2031 they can figure some things out and really come in as one of the big boys, but as of right now, it looks like you're just hurting your strength of schedule in comparison to the big boys like the SEC and the Big Ten. But definitely something to monitor going forward. It's something that I will be watching very closely because, frankly, I love college basketball as well. So would love to see some type of matchup between UConn and Kansas in the middle of the season. But also, there's the other part of me that says Big East basketball is a special thing, and I don't want to lose that. So it's the ultimate battle of conference realignment. It's been that battle since it started, and frankly, we're not done. And I don't know how close we are to done. I think the ACC is going to be the next big landslide, and we'll figure out where we stand from there. But this is just another chapter in a long line of chapters for conference realignment over the last couple of years, and this will be a very interesting one. I think it'll be a little bit more drawn out, but at the end of the day, I would be slightly surprised if UConn did not find their way into the Big 12 at some point. I do think it's going to take a little bit of time to get Fox on board and to get all the ducks in a row, but I tend to believe when enough people are behind one thing, it tends to happen in college football. So I expect that to unfold at least in some time in the next couple of years, but we'll definitely keep you updated as it all unfolds and as maybe Fox becomes a little bit more keen on the idea. But let's take a break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Week 0 just one more time. We're going to get into what did we learn about Week 0? What did we learn about Florida State, about Georgia Tech, about SMU? You know, not so great things about Florida State and SMU, and some really good things about Georgia Tech, but I want to break that down, and then some things that some people thought they learned, but maybe you didn't on Saturday. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about UConn possibly joining the Big 12 would be a very interesting thing for basketball, would be something for football that we'd have to wait just a little bit for, I believe till 2031. So definitely something that'll be a little bit more drawn out in the college football side, but still something that is going to be very important about the future of all college sports going forward. But let's get into Week 0. We'll close the book on Week 0 today. I wanted to get into what did we learn in Week 0, because there are a lot of overreactions going around, a lot of people going crazy about Florida State or SMU or Georgia Tech, and I kind of just want to find the middle ground of what we actually learned, what we thought we learned, and kind of differentiate between the two. But let's get into this real quick, and I think the biggest thing that came out of that Florida State-Georgia Tech game, and it was on the Florida State side by a mile to me, the most important thing was they have a coaching and motivation problem at Florida State, and it's not necessarily a glaringly obvious one, and frankly, it's not one that can't be fixed, because going forward, you can totally change your tune. You can make sure that you're not necessarily pushing the same buttons you pushed on this past weekend to make sure your guys are ready. But at the end of the day, these guys were not ready to play. Plain and simple, whether it's from a coaching perspective, whether it's a game plan, whether it's motivation going onto the field and just desire to play, none of those things were in play for Florida State this past weekend. They played straight up bad for pretty much the entirety of the game, and there's a couple of different things that could be happening here, whether it's the coaches just don't really know how to properly motivate this team with all the new players and all the different changes, or possibly worse, frankly, possibly worse is they just don't know the personnel they have. They're not fully confident in the group that they have. And this was a big topic of conversation around that D-line in particular, because it was called by Pete Thamel and a couple of different NFL reporters and things as the best defensive line in the country. And it didn't look that way on Saturday. And I don't think these people were outright lying or saying that, or trying to be biased in any way. I think they just saw athletic freaks, because you look across that defensive line, those are 4 athletic freaks. I can promise you that. But at the end of the day, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win a ton of football games. So the scheming part of it was left a lot to be desired on Saturday, where you had a lot of these elite athletes. You had a lot of fantastic players, even on that defensive line. It doesn't mean you don't have to scheme them open. It doesn't mean you don't have to make sure that they're running stunts, that they're getting a little bit more dynamic in their pass rush in the way that the offensive line sees them. And they didn't do that throughout the entire day. It felt like they just kept kind of plugging away at, we're bigger, we're stronger, and we're going to make something happen at some point, and it never happened. So I think the motivation problem is one that can easily be fixed, because now the motivation flips to you're fighting for your life. And we'll see what happens throughout that next couple of weeks for Florida State. But it's definitely going to be really interesting to watch that. The coaching problems might be a little bit harder to overcome, because you got to fix a lot of things on the offensive and defensive side of the ball when it comes to play calling, or it's going to look a lot like that throughout the season for Florida State. And then the other thing I learned was the portal just wasn't as kind to Florida State this year than it was in past years. And it's not like they took this monumental step back, but it was enough. There's no doubt about that. In the years past, they brought in Johnny Wilson, Keon Coleman, Trey Benson, Jordan Travis. They brought in, on the defensive side, brought in Jared Verse, brought in Braden Fisk. They've done incredible things on both sides of the ball in the portal. And I think they got good players this time around. I think DJU is a good player. I think Malik Benson is a good player. I think Roydell Williams is a good player. I think Jalen Brown is a good player. The thing is, Florida State can't do good. They have to have great players out there. They have to have elite players out there if they want to do what they claim they want to do this season, which is go to the ACC title, win it, leave no doubt, get into the playoff, and then possibly make some noise. And all of that stuff is technically still on the table. If this is the Florida State team we're getting all year, there's no chance they get to that point. But at the end of the day, I think there were a lot of people, burying Florida State, saying there's no way they come back from this. And don't get me wrong, I have my big-time worries about this team going forward. But I think the two things that you really learned is there's going to be some coaching changes in terms of personnel and in terms of play calling that just have to happen. And these guys that you got through the portal just aren't quite as talented as the ones that you had before. And maybe that's another coaching thing. You have to pick up the slack through scheme and through design. So it'll be really interesting to watch that. But moving on to Georgia Tech, Brent Key has made all the difference in this program since he showed up. And this has been a thing really since he stepped into that interim head coaching role back 2 years ago, where they, I believe, were 0-4 going into his tenure, or maybe 1-3. They went 4-4 the rest of the way, and that doesn't sound crazy, but it was quite the flip for that team, and it's continued on. And I think the biggest thing that you took away from that game was, honestly, after the game, Georgia Tech got on the mics for ESPN and was doing all the interviews and everything, and there were very, very few people in that team, and frankly, maybe even no one on that team that talked about any of their personal accomplishments. They all talked about how we're one of 20, we're one of 120, we all play together, we all play for each other, and that's the mantra of this team, and that's the reason that they walk onto a field with a team like Florida State that is bigger, that is faster, that is stronger, that is more talented, and do not get phased, because they know it's not just me out here. It's 119 guys right behind me, and it's going to be incredible to watch this team, because I think that's the biggest thing I've noticed is just a total mentality shift in Atlanta, Georgia, and it's showing on and off the field in recruiting right now. And then the coordinators have totally elevated this Georgia Tech team. There's a world where they're going to play a number of games this year where they're the least talented team on the field. They don't have the athletes that the other team has, but they're just going to out-scheme the other team. With Buster Faulkner on that offensive side of the ball, absolute superstar. And then Tyler Santucci on defense did just an incredible job getting at DJ throughout this game with blitzes and coverages just to confuse everything on the offensive side of the ball for Florida State. So you look at both these guys, I would not be surprised at all if they were head coaches in the very near future. I think Buster Faulkner, in fact, he turned down a couple of head coaching jobs this past offseason. I think a good one's coming for him this offseason, because this guy is an absolute superstar and is going to put on a show throughout this entire year. So overall, the biggest difference for Georgia Tech compared to the last couple of years is just they got the coaches. They got the guys in that building that know exactly what they're doing, have a very strict identity, and don't go away from that by any means. So very huge shout out to them. It felt very obvious that the coaching staff was just miles better than Florida State's on Saturday. And then moving on to SMU, they played Nevada on Saturday, and they had some issues. There's no two ways about that. And the biggest one for me is this team has a discipline problem on that field. There's no two ways about that. I mean, you walk out into a week 0 game where you're playing a Nevada team where you know that if you just execute your game plan, go about your business, you're going to win. You are more talented. You have so much more going for you that the only way that you lose this game, the only way that they stayed in this game was if you keep them in, and man, did SMU keep them in this game. They had 11 penalties, 125 penalty yards, and a lot of them were just stupid. There was a guy lining up on a play, and he decided it was the right time to spit on another player. That's going to get you a penalty. Believe it or not, that is going to get you a penalty, and it's one of those things that has kind of happened for Rhett Lashlee throughout his career, where his teams are just missing that extra thing, missing that discipline part of their game that could take them over the top, and there's plenty of ways to fix that throughout the year, but as of right now, this looks like a team that might just hand a couple of teams games throughout the year. And then the quarterback position, because you got to find one and just stick with it. Frankly, I do think it's Preston Stone. I think that's going to be your guy going forward, but it could be Kevin Jennings. At the end of the day, you just got to pick one, because you walked out there on Saturday and started rotating these guys every single series. That is not a way for any quarterback to get in a rhythm. There's no quarterback on planet Earth that would be able to get into a rhythm going out there one drive and then sitting for 20, 25 minutes, going back out there for another drive. That just does not work. Now, there is a way to work in both quarterbacks, whether it's Kevin Jennings being your outright starter. I'd be more on board with that because maybe he's the best guy for it. At the end of the day, just pick the best guy and move forward. Now, Kevin Jennings could still very much be in this offense, whether it's different packages, running packages, that type of thing. He absolutely can still be a factor. You cannot put him in for an entire drive and then expect Preston Stone to come right back on the field and start slinging the ball around. That's just not something that's going to be able to be done, especially for college quarterbacks. So at the end of the day, they just got to find a guy. I think it's going to be Preston Stone going forward, and they have a game this week against Houston Christian to maybe work out some of that at the end of the day. But overall, I do think it's going to be Preston Stone. But even if it's Kevin Jennings, just let it be Kevin Jennings. Do not bounce back and forth. Do not, make this wishy-washy and confuse everyone and make your offense much less dangerous than it can be with just one quarterback. Call the offense for that quarterback and move forward from there. So it's going to be incredible to watch this team develop, especially because there were quite a few issues on Saturday that just need to be fixed, plain and simple, before they get into ACC play, or they're in quite a bit of trouble this upcoming year. But Week 0 in particular is a hard one to gauge. You don't want to overreact too much. You don't want to take away that Florida State is terrible and they'll never get close to the playoff, or Georgia Tech is a playoff dark horse, or SMU is a team that's just not ready for the ACC. I don't want to get into all that. I don't want to get into all the overreactions, but what I can say is Florida State has a number of things to change when it comes to play calling, coaching, and motivation. What I can say is Georgia Tech did an incredible job when it comes to play calling, coaching, and motivation, and I can say that SMU just has to be more disciplined and has to find that quarterback. So all of those things feel pretty obvious coming out of that Week 0, and obviously there are a couple of reactions that aren't quite as obvious that people are making, but I like to stay away from those at least for the first couple of weeks. By like week 2 or 3, maybe you'll start hearing me talking a little bit in absolutes about some of these teams. But as for right now, I think I'm going to give them just a little bit of leeway to get into this season, and then we'll see where they are about week 3 or week 4. But let's take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to do all my bold takes for the 2024 season. This is something that I just had forgotten to do, if I'm being totally honest with you. So I wanted to sneak it in here before week 1 really got underway. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with that. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different things we learned from week 0 and some of the things that maybe just be a little bit more overreaction than anything else. But I do want to get into my hot takes as we head into the 2024 season. This is something that probably should have done about a week ago before we got into week 0, but I figure before week 1 is plenty of time. So let's get into this real quick, and I have a couple on here that I have a feeling are going to be not so well received, if I had to imagine. And the first one I want to start with is I think Kyron Lacy might just lead the country in receiving yards. And this one's a little bit taller of an order because when you go outside the Power 4, there are some guys like Ricky White and Torrey Horton that might just cause some problems for this. But at the end of the day, when I look at what Kyron Lacy is in this offense, I don't know if there's another wide receiver in this offense that is going to be able to take the pressure off of him. I don't think C.J. Daniels is the guy that everyone really wanted him to be down there in Baton Rouge. I think he's a good player. I think he's more of a wide receiver 3 than a wide receiver 2. I think Chris Hilton's a really good player. I think he's more of a wide receiver 3 than a wide receiver 2. And I think Adam Anderson is going to be a guy that is going to make plenty of plays, but at the end of the day, Kyron Lacy is going to be the guy. He's going to be the absolute go-to guy pretty much throughout this entire season. And I think when you look at him, the frame is absolutely ridiculous, big, physical, absolutely someone that is a red zone threat, but also he can kind of go. He can get out of a break and really burn someone on a deep route. And Garrett Nussmeier can throw those deep balls pretty beautifully. Now, Nussmeier has had a little bit of trouble with turnovers throughout fall camp, and it's something that we'll talk about when we preview that LSU-USC game. But at the end of the day, I do think they're going to be able to figure this out. I do think that Garrett Nussmeier is going to be a really good quarterback this year, and even with guys like Luther Burden and Tatori McMillan and all of the incredible receivers all around the country, I think Lacy has a little bit more on his shoulders this year. I think he knows that, and I think he's going to make a number of huge plays for this LSU team that might have to be just a little bit more pass-heavy this year because obviously you don't have the quarterback run game you did a year ago, but also you don't necessarily have the running back room that you love as they've had in the past a number of different ways. So that's one that I'm watching very, very closely and one that I think is going to be really fun to watch because that guy is really fun to watch play. So cannot wait to see what that guy does on the field, and it'll start on Sunday when they face off against USC. But moving on, I don't think Washington makes a bowl game. I think this is a program that is going to be good. I think when you bring in someone like Jedd Fisch, it's a fantastic head coach, a really good offensive system, and a guy that has every ability to get a ton of really good developmental guys in that room because of his ties to the NFL. So I think they're going to be good in the long run. There's just too much change in this roster to make me feel any type of confidence about what they can do because it's not like you're rebuilding, one side of the ball. It's not like you're rebuilding a couple of position groups here and there. It's pretty much across the board. You have to figure out an entirely new system, entirely new personnel, entirely new system in terms of how you're going to deal with these players. There's a million different things that are bouncing around that program, and I think you look at the schedule, it's not the craziest thing in the world by any means. They definitely have the ability to get to 6 wins and possibly make a bowl game, but you're 130th in the country at 134 teams in returning production and have done some good things through the portal, but just not enough. I like Will Rogers. I think he's a good player, but at the end of the day, I do not see him starting throughout this year for Washington. I think he gets a little bit ugly early on, and I think Damon Williams Jr., the talented freshman, likely takes over at some point. So, and the big thing of this is, starting on October 5th, they have at Rutgers, Michigan, at Iowa, at Indiana, USC, at Penn State, UCLA, and at Oregon. It's going to be really hard to find 2 or 3 wins in that thing. It's going to be really hard to go to Rutgers, go all the way across the country, and beat a team that's not going to hand you much. That Michigan game is going to be a nightmare for a number of reasons. At Iowa, you're facing a defense that might just be able to stop you and have you score 3 points that game. And then at Indiana is a very sketchy one. USC, I think, is going to be tough. At Penn State and at Oregon, obviously, are going to be really tough games. So overall, I think this is a team that very capable, has a lot of things in place to possibly make some noise this upcoming year. I just think they're going to start a little bit more rocky than they want. I think they're going to put in that freshman quarterback and then just kind of ride out the rest of the season and then maybe hit the ground running in 2025. But first year for Jedd Fisch, I don't think it's all that pretty in Seattle. Moving on, I think Georgia versus Florida, I think will end up being a top 20 game. And this one might be a little bit less hot when you look at that Florida schedule. I think they could go 5-2 and still be a top 20 team when this thing comes around, and that would include losses to maybe Tennessee and maybe Texas A&M, but there's a number of other teams that could get in their way. Obviously, that Miami game is huge, and frankly, if this were to happen, I might need them to win this weekend against Miami. We'll make that pick tomorrow, but at the end of the day, they have Tennessee, they have UCF, they have Kentucky at home, so it'll be interesting to watch this unfold. There's no doubt about that. I think there's a number of games that are big-time toss-ups for this Florida team, but let's say they win in week 1, and then they dominate Samford in week 2, and then A&M's coming to town, and maybe A&M has a loss on their schedule, or maybe they're riding high off a Notre Dame win and coming to Gainesville just a little bit soft, a little bit not ready for that game, and they're able to steal that one. Then you're off running, and things get really, really interesting. I'm not too worried about Georgia. I think even if they lose to Texas and Alabama before this game, I think they're likely still a top 15 or 20 team. So overall, I think this is going to be a really fun game, and I think when it comes around, it's going to have a ton of implications. By the time the end of the season comes, it might have a lot less implications because of the way Florida ends it, but I do think Florida will start strong and make this game really, really fun in Jacksonville. Moving on, I don't think any team in their new conference is going to win it in their first year. This is something that was obvious when I made my conference picks, but Utah, Texas, and Oregon are the teams that everyone's really watching, and Utah has the best shot to win their conference. They are definitely the team that comes in and says, we can win absolutely every game on the schedule, no doubt about it. But at the end of the day, Cam Rising does have to stay healthy, and it's been quite a while since he's been able to stay healthy. Obviously not making any bets based on injuries, but it's definitely something that could get in their way. And also, I think the changes in the Big 12 were a little bit bigger than some people are giving them credit for, and I think Utah might not be able to play the brand of football they were able to play in the Pac-12, where it's just, we're going to lean on you and lean on you and lean on you until you quit. So it'll be interesting to watch, but don't necessarily love Utah in the Big 12 race. Moving on to Texas, I think this one, obviously you have the advantageous schedule, at least in SEC terms. Not necessarily easy, but easier than everyone else around you. I can promise you that. And then I don't know really when it comes down to it. You know, when they're playing UGA or Alabama or Ole Miss in Atlanta, are they going to be able to make the plays is the big time question that I have. And throughout the year, you know, there's going to be so many different environments that are going to be able to possibly trip them up, whether it's going up to Fayetteville and playing Arkansas or playing a couple of these teams on the road, going up to Michigan. There are enough games on this schedule that will definitely be able to trip this team up, and I think they might just go 10-2. Maybe they make the conference championship, but if you're playing Georgia and Atlanta, it's going to be a tall order. I can promise you that. But moving on to Oregon, this is the team that looks the most complete of the bunch, right? This is the team that has the most talent, that the roster just looks the most clean from top to bottom. But I think the difference in style as they walk into the Big Ten is being a little bit undersold. They are going to play a totally different offense than pretty much everyone else in the conference, and it's not that they can't be successful with that, but it does mean against Ohio State and Michigan, where maybe their defense are capable of stopping your offense, they're going to be able to slow down those games. They're going to be able to run the ball pretty effectively, and if that's the case, then it's going to be really hard to walk into Ann Arbor and get a win. Or it's going to be really hard for even Ohio State to walk into your building and you to beat them. So it's going to be really interesting to watch that one unfold. I don't love Oregon in that. I do think they're going to be a really good team and make the playoff. I'm not necessarily burying Oregon, but at the end of the day, I do think some of those changes going into the Big Ten are going to be a little bit more precarious than some people are expecting, at least for Oregon. And then moving on, I think the season this upcoming year will lessen the portal usage going forward. And I don't know how much it will lessen it. I think this could be one that kind of unfolds over the next couple of seasons, but it's something I've talked about a lot. You know, this season with all of the changes and all of the differences and so many different transfer quarterbacks all around the country, maybe continuity wins out. Maybe it's the Georgias, the Texas, the Ohio States, even with a new quarterback, and the Oregons, even with a new quarterback, that have the ability to be standing there at the end because they have the depth, because they have guys from high school that have been there for a couple of years, that have developed, that fully understand their offense or their defense. So I think that's the biggest thing that I'm kind of taking away from this season is you have so many changes. You have so many new teams like Ole Miss, Miami, all of these incredible teams that absolutely are looking to make some noise this upcoming year. And frankly, I think a number of them will. But Will they be able to be standing there at the end of the day holding the trophy? I don't necessarily love that. And I do think there's a world where you get to February, you get to March, and everyone's kind of looking around that player personnel department and saying, maybe it's worth it. Just put a little bit more energy into high school recruiting, start to build up the depth of this roster, and then say, okay, let's go pick and choose our guys out of the portal. I've always thought that's the way to go about business, and I think team building out of the portal, as we just saw with Florida State on Saturday, is a very precarious conversation. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one. This one might be a little bit longer of a burn than I initially thought, but at the end of the day, I do think there will be some conversations at the end of the year that'll just say, maybe we just push a little bit more into high school recruiting, pull a little bit back from the portal, and then pick our spots in a couple of years when we have a lot of the other things set. So it'll be really interesting to watch that unfold. But then finally, likely my hottest one of the bunch, I just realized I forgot to change the caption here. I apologize for that. But Quinn Ewers, I think, is going to run away with the Heisman this year. And this one is definitely a very hot take because there are so many good quarterbacks around the country, so many incredible running backs and wide receivers that want to be heard from, but I think he's going to put up silly numbers this upcoming year. The amount of weapons and speed in particular that Texas has is just outright incredible. And it's not one of those teams in the past couple of years where if you take Xavier Worthy out of the game plan, if you were able to do that, which not a lot of people were, but if you were able to do that against Texas, you felt pretty good about where you were standing. Now, they still have Adonai Mitchell, they still had Jordan Whittington, they still had dudes out there, but Xavier Worthy was a huge part of this offense. He was the catalyst. There's no two ways about that. Texas now has about 3 or 4 guys that can fit into that role. The 3 or 4 guys that could have 600 yards this upcoming season, but none of them top 1,000. Or a couple guys that could have 40 receptions this upcoming year, but none of them top 60. It's going to be a lot about spreading the ball around, especially with the running back troubles that they've been having. It's going to be a lot of the ball just in Quinn Ewers' hands time and again. And we're going to see if he's going to be able to make those steps from last year where the deep ball was not there. The deep ball was not nearly where it needed to be, and a lot of that was footwork and timing and a lot of very niche things that affected those passes. So we'll see if he's taken that step forward. I tend to believe he has. It seems like he's been doing an incredible job in this offense throughout the offseason, and I think there's just a lot of things lining up for him. The talent that he's going to have on the outside, both at wide receiver and tight end. The running back problems puts the ball in his hand just a little bit more often than it would before, and I think being a third-year player in a Steve Sarkisian offense is a pretty special thing, tends to be. So I've talked about it before. I think it could be a Mac Jones type season, but there won't be a Devontae Smith having 2,000 yards to kind of steal that Heisman away from him. So I do think Quinn Ewers kind of runs away with the Heisman, and by the time we get to NYC, it's something of a formality because we know Quinn Ewers' name is going to be called, and we know he's going to be lifting that trophy. So that's definitely a hot take, one that I know a lot of people are going to disagree with because there are a lot of people that don't love Quinn Ewers, but at the end of the day, I think there are so many things going for him going into this year, and I think he's going to put up numbers that are just going to be downright silly. I feel pretty confident about that, but that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow for even more Week 1 predictions.
Mm-hmm.